right, so for our last question, we've talked a lot about what our folks and their families and caregivers can do when being approached by a police officer. So the last question I want to address with you, Sean, is how are officers trained to interact with our folks? Can you tell us about that process?
Sure. So a lot has changed in the training for officers when it comes to crisis intervention type training. Officers now, when a new officer is hired and they go to a police academy, they're required to have 16 hours of training. To show you the difference, when I was hired a long time ago, I only received 4 hours of training. That was it. It's now up to 16. Additionally, if an officer is going to become what we call a training officer, so they train new officers on the street, they're required to have an additional 8 hours of training in crisis intervention. Most departments now, especially in the Bay Area, and pretty much throughout the United States, are sending their officers to 40 hours of crisis intervention training. And those are the courses that Ann, Ashley, and I teach at. One thing we do differently in Sunnyvale is we actually have a true crisis intervention team. So what happens is our officers for our department receive 40, every officer in our department receives 40 hours worth of crisis intervention training, no matter who you are. What we do though is we know there are certain officers who really want to use this training, who want to make a difference, who want to help people in a crisis. They are part of our crisis intervention team. What our crisis intervention team does is we deal with those situations where somebody maybe has had too many crises, and we've been out with them too many times. So we want to make sure we get the resources for them and for their family to help them, so we're not having to go out with them anymore, and we get them on the right track. So that's kind of makes us a little bit different in Sunnyvale. Some agencies have crisis intervention teams, but that's how we model ours. So most agencies now in the county, as you all know, are getting, every officer is getting 40 hours worth of training.
And what are some of the resources that you do offer to families or to persons who you've encountered?
Well, this would be one resource. San Andreas Regional Center would be a resource that we would offer. NAMI is another one that we use. Uplift, which is Eastville, Ming Kwong, EMQ, we use Uplift. There is county mental health. There are two ex-law enforcement officers who are retired. They work as law enforcement liaisons with county mental health. So we will interact with them too, because that's what they're there for. They're there to help us. They're there to help county mental health. We will use family doctors as resources. A lot of times what happens is, in some cases, a doctor may not know there's been a recurring situation with their patient because they see so many patients. So we may reach out to that doctor to let them know, hey, just let you know we've kind of been out a couple times on your patient, and you may want to just kind of recheck on them and make sure things are well. So whatever resources we can get there, we do. Our officers have a list of resources. They get it from the 40 hours of training. There's resources we've developed. Momentum Health is another resource we use. Veterans Administration, VA Hospital is another resource we use. And we build those relationships. I think it's extremely important. I have a relationship I now have a relationship here. As I told Ann, I've been doing this for a very long time. I never knew the center even existed until Ann reached out and talked to me. Bad on me that I didn't know that.
And now we're going to exist in your world a lot.
You do. I can't get rid of you now. No, I was kidding. but that's great, because now I've gone back to our officers and said, hey, do you guys aware of this resource that we have out there? Are you aware of this? And I'm encouraging my officers or my head of my CIT team, come down here and meet. That's one thing, that's why I mentioned that, Dave, is one thing I encourage officers to do is, it's about relationships. It's about getting to know each other. That's how we break down fear. That's how we break down walls, if we get to know each other. You now know me. You've seen me up here, I've talked to you. I guarantee you, if you saw me on the street, you're going to want to come up to me and say hello. And that's great. That's what I want. I want that. I don't want you to be afraid of me. I don't want you to be afraid of another officer when you see them. All officers are not going to be like me. There are some better than me, and maybe some not as good as me. but how you interact with them and how we interact with you is extremely important. And that's why the resources are extremely important. It breaks down these walls, it breaks down this fear, because we get to know each other. Okay? And that's what's important. It really is. And that's why resources are important too, because we can't do everything. But our biggest concern is we need to get you the help that you need. And if you're a victim of a crime, that's even more important to get you the help you need. It really is. Because unfortunately, you are taken advantage of on certain circumstances and you do become victims of a crime. That's when we have to be at our best. And that's when we have to do our best in those circumstances. And make sure we get the right resources involved to help you.
And that's especially when you're a victim of a crime, is the time that you need to be your best advocate. That means you need to be very open and honest with the officer that you're giving the report to, that you need to not lie or cover up for the person who hurt you, even if it's someone you know, even if it was someone you thought was a friend or a caregiver or even a family member. You have to be your own advocate, because police don't read minds. They don't know what happened. And so you need to feel enough trust with an officer to be able to give them all the details of what happened. Even if it's somebody that you cared about or care about, you've got to tell the police officer, because they can't help without all the information. So it's really important that you trust that they're going to have your best interest at heart.
And we're going to ask a lot of questions, because that's what we do. Because our job is to investigate, is to find out what happened. And when Ashley described to you, when interaction with police officers, that's whether you're interacting with a police officer because someone's called in something because you've done something, or they think you've done something. But it's really, really important is when you're in that victim of a crime, that like Ann said and Ashley said, that you let the officer know everything that you know. Do not be afraid to tell them anything. They need to know everything, and you have to be comfortable doing that. And follow what Ashley said. If the officer is not asking the question right, or they're asking too many questions too fast, let them know that. Okay? Let your caretaker let them know that. Let a family member let them know that.
Sometimes when you ask a lot of questions and we're afraid, sometimes they would hold their ears or, get, anxiety, all that, so.
Or maybe run out of the room.
Yes, that too.
Right? Here we go, we're talking about running again, right? But that's a reaction.
Yes.
I want to say something for the caretakers and family members, and this is something that you really need to understand. Depending upon the circumstances, we may not want you in the room while we're interviewing your family member or the person you're taking care of.
Right.
And there's reasons for that. The reason may be is you might be the person who harmed them. You may not know that they complained about that, but they may have, and we need to keep you out of that room while we talk to them, because we don't want you to intimidate them. Or we may be talking about something that we want to make sure they understand the truth and they can give us answers. And if you're in the room trying to answer for them, we're not able to do that. Now, you can ask the officer, can I stay in the room during the interview? Can I stay here while you ask the questions? They may or may not allow you to stay in there. Just so you understand, in this county, we do have certain protocols for how we investigate certain crimes in this county. And protocols, one of the things I talk about in protocols is how you deal with a victim of a crime based upon the circumstances. And it may mean that we may not have you in that room at that time. But don't be afraid to ask that question, can I remain in the room? Because you may be able to help us, but ask that first. But if you're asked not to be in the room, please don't be insulted by it. We're not trying to be mean. It's just we may be following a protocol, or then again too, the complaint may have been about you. Whether it's true or not, we need to interview the person to find out. And we don't want you there to intimidate or to interfere. Because I've experienced this. Family members want the best for their family member. And the family member's not doing well, they try to intervene and they try to interrupt. That's not benefiting me as an officer when I'm trying to investigate something. So please understand that may happen, that you may be asked to leave the room, and you may ask not to stay in the room. So
And caregivers and parents, just recognize too, if an officer's struggling to communicate with your person, there's a learning curve. If you've not communicated with a person with a developmental or intellectual disability, let them have their learning curve. Don't step in and try to fix everything. If they ask you, can you help with this, then please help. But we also want that officer to be better prepared the next time they deal with a person with a developmental or intellectual disability. And they have to learn how to communicate with folks. So you can guide them and say, maybe slow down, maybe ask a simpler question, maybe rephrase it a different way, but don't try to answer or step in there, because you're helping them to learn as well if you don't interfere.
And you just reminded me of one additional training I completely forgot about just where you saying that. So additionally, officers in this county will go through a update course. It's a 24-hour update course, and the recommendation is officers go to the update course after 3 years for that exact reason you talked about. It's one thing to be trained in the classroom. It's one thing to actually do it. And after 3 years, officers will get enough experience doing it that we bring them back in and we give them more additional skills and more additional resources to help them, and a lot more things click for them to do it. So I forgot about that. Thank you. Just by saying, you reminded me.
It's different too, and you don't know how they're going to react, or so disabilities affect people differently. So.
Yeah, and do you guys have good days and bad days?
We all
Yeah.
So do we. We have good days and bad days too. You may catch me on a bad day and I'm not at my best.
No.
And that may happen, but it's the same thing for you. Everybody has good days and bad days. And we just have to work through those to make sure we do what's right. That's all.
How about that? Wasn't that great? Well, thank you all three, Captain Ahern and Ashley. I think the information is very valuable. Be sure maybe tomorrow or when you're working with other folks, talk about the questions that were asked and maybe have a dialogue about all this information.
Officers are given many hours of crisis intervention training. Sunnyvale and some other cities have crisis intervention teams to address chronic crises in the community. Crisis teams connect people with resources like county mental health, different agencies, or doctors. If you're ever the victim of a crime, it's important to use your self-advocacy skills so that you can communicate clearly with the officer to get the resources you need. Communicating with the officer is especially key when you're the victim, so that you can give them as much information as possible to solve a crime. Family and caregivers may be excluded from an interview. You can ask if you can stay, but the officer has to follow protocol when interviewing victims. Police officers are human, and they have good days and bad days just like everyone else. So it's in all our best interest to communicate clearly, stay calm, and use our advocacy and cooperative skills.